President Obama coming under heavy fire just hours before the horrific Paris attacks. The president insisted the brutal terror group is contained geographically.
I don't think they're gaining strength. What is true is that from the start, our goal has been first to contain, and we have contained them.
And today, speaking at the G20 summit in Turkey, the president labeled the slaughter as a setback.
There will be setbacks and there will be successes. The terrible events in Paris were obviously a terrible and sickening setback.
Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger goes on the record from Capitol Hill. Thanks for joining us, sir. I wondered what your reaction was, because I know you have followed this closely and that you've introduced legislation. You've tried, I think, to be a helping hand to the White House to say, if you want to do more, I will help you try to do that. What was your reaction to his remarks today?
No, it's a joke. I mean, he says there'll be setbacks and there'll be successes. My question is, what's been a success? Tell me one of the successes. You know, yesterday the French bombed a number of targets in Raqqa, and that was celebrated as a huge success. The problem is, why were there existing targets still existing in Raqqa? Why weren't they bombed by the United States anyway? And then the president at one point says, you know, people have a right to question my strategy. They have a right to go popping off at the mouth. And it was almost like an immature way to say, hey, you have a right to disagree. So, look, the president, I would have thought in 7 years he'd have a lot thicker skin than he does, but it only seems to be getting thinner when he realizes his strategy's failing and people call him out on it.
One of the things that experts in the field, and the Department of Defense in particular, has been calling upon the president to allow them to change the rules of engagement over in the area. Can you explain what that means and what kind of change do they need?
Yeah, look, they need a rule of engagement that basically says if you're pretty significantly confident you have a target, you can take action on it. Right now, I believe that the president is so averse to any civilian casualties, and we ought to do everything we can to avoid civilian casualties, don't get me wrong, but he's so averse to it that in many cases we don't strike what we almost know are certain targets because we're afraid there may be a civilian casualty. You know, look, the Russians and their track record in Syria already, they've bombed a number of medical facilities and civilian targets, and we don't hear people calling them out. The president needs to loosen the rule of engagements for our pilots, but we need better intelligence on the ground, frankly. That intelligence apparatus was unraveled when we left Iraq. We had great signals intelligence that was just gone. In order to be able to find the head of the snake, kill him, capture, and continue to unravel this organization, unfortunately, we just don't have that in place.
One of the things that the president has done in the past, and he did it again today, is to put up a straw man argument saying that, what am I going to do? He tells us what he's not going to do, that he's not going to put 50,000 troops on the ground. But in your research and your information, the people that come and talk to you, is anybody suggesting putting 50,000 troops on the ground?
I've never heard a single person, whether it was even in talking to me or whether it was anywhere on any television show anywhere in history recently, that has said we need 100,000 troops in Iraq again or we need to reoccupy the Middle East. Nobody suggested it, but you heard it in the press conference today, and you hear it from the president all the time that evidently there's this contingent of folks that are arguing that. He's not. Obviously, that doesn't exist. We are calling for a reasonable strategy, but we need a strategy that destroys ISIS. The red line needs to be the existence of ISIS, not the existence of ground troops. If we say no ground troops, we're basically saying ISIS is bad unless it takes ground troops, in which case those are worse.
And do you think that ISIS actually has a safe haven from which to operate? Because the president said that they won't be allowed to have one, but at this point, do you think they do?
Oh, sure they do. I mean, look, they have a caliphate right now the size of the United Kingdom. We're doing a handful of airstrikes a day. I think the vast majority of members of ISIS do not feel threatened by airstrikes. They're surprised when one actually hits. They have freedom of movement. This is where I think a small contingent of ground troops can stop freedom of movement for ISIS, cut off supply routes and everything else. So I do think they have a safe haven right now. And by the way, it's a deeper issue than to talk about here, but part of that way to get rid of ISIS, you have to get rid of the government of Bashar al-Assad. He's the incubator of ISIS. It is not a choice between Assad or ISIS.
Well, we'll see about that, because you know that that's what they're probably talking about right now. Thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us.
You bet. Take care.